I'd like to start by reading the quote that is on the song sheet. It says, "The first peace, which is the most important, is that which comes within the souls of people when they realize their oneness with the universe. And when they realize at the center of the universe dwells the Great Spirit, and that this center is really everywhere. It is within each of us." And that is from Black Elk. So a couple weeks ago, I knew that I had meditation coming up, and I went to the sheet that has the topics that's on our refrigerator. And I read that quote by Black Elk. And it was in the morning. My daughter was there, and I said, "Wow, Katie, this really flashes me back, seeing this quote from Black Elk, because when I moved to Sunburst in 1972, and just around this time of year, it was in March, before I showed up there, I had been given a book called The Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, and it was the first spiritual book I had ever read. And I read that book, I just devoured it, and I didn't understand hardly any of it. But it was speaking to something within me that I had never accessed before or been aware of before. And something was stirring within me at that time that was like some kind of an awakening, because I had never had any interest in religion or spirituality. And I wasn't raised with any religion, so I didn't really understand it. So maybe in a way that was a good thing, because I was a blank slate starting out on my journey. But when I showed up at the farm, and I just felt so at home, like many others did at the time and have since. There was a little library that was right off of the meditation room at the farm. And there were a number of books in there. And one of them was this book, Black Elk Speaks. And I picked it up sometime that year. I don't know if it was in the summer or in the fall, but I read the book. And again, there was a lot about it that I didn't really quite understand, especially about the mystical experiences that Black Elk had. But then there was a lot of history about what was happening in the late 1800s in America, and that was interesting to me. And when I look back on it now, it was such a sad, sad period of time for so many people. And so I said that to Katie in the morning, and then that night, later that evening, I went into my bedroom and I opened up my iPad and I went to YouTube. And the very first thing that popped up was the story of a Lakota spiritual man, Black Elk. So I thought, wow, that's really great. And then I thought, well, I wonder who's really listening. Is this the universe talking to me? Or is this AI listening through my phone, and then my phone told my iPad, and then my iPad pops it up? I don't really care, because it was perfect timing either way. And I'll take it. So I watched that, and it was really a recap of Black Elk and the process of this book, Black Elk Speaks, coming into play, into manifestation. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit And the author, his name was John Nyhard, and he was an American author. And he was born, I think, in 1881. So at the end of what was, the end of the wonderful life that the native peoples had on the plains, and that, for thousands of years until that period. So he was interested in that. But the very first book he wrote in 1901 was a book on spiritual mysticism from the East. I think it was on Hinduism. So he was inclined towards spiritual concepts, and that's what he was really interested in. He was more interested in interviewing the holy people of the Native Americans than he was really in the history of what happened during the different battles and things like that went on, which are very well recorded. So in 1930, he had heard about Black Elk, and Black Elk was a Lakota Sioux Indian, or Native American. I will say, I Googled to try to understand what is the proper terminology, and some people are still fine with American Indian and Native American, and so I'm going to do my best to not offend anyone today with the way I talk, but please forgive me if I say something that doesn't sound quite right. So he went to talk with Black Elk, and the ride there was really long on a long dirt road. Black Elk lived at the end of this really long dirt road. And his driver, his name was Flying Hawk. And on the way over there to see Black Elk, Flying Hawk told John Nyhard, he said, there's a good chance you're not going to be granted an interview. And John said, well, why? I've been interviewing Native elders in this region for almost 30 years, and I have never been denied an interview. They all want to talk about the old times and tell their stories. And Flying Hawk said, well, this old man is peculiar, and you're just not ever sure what he's going to do. He said, just recently, I brought a reporter from a local newspaper in Nebraska. And she told him that she wanted to talk with him about Crazy Horse and to write an article about Crazy Horse, because Black Elk was Crazy Horse's second cousin. They knew each other quite well. Crazy Horse was maybe 10 years older than Black Elk, or maybe 15, but they were second cousins, and they knew each other really well. And so I wanted, just to make sure I get some of this right, I wanted to read. So Black Elk was also going blind by this time, and he was in his late 60s. He was born in 1863. So in 1930, he was getting into his late 60s. And he said that, Flying Hawk said that the woman was sitting with him who wanted to do the article, and he sat there for a long time, he said, squinting at her because he was pretty blind. And then he said, I can see that you are a nice woman, and I can feel that you are good, but I do not want to talk about such things. And so he did not grant her that interview. He didn't want to talk about Crazy Horse. So when they arrived at the one-room log cabin where Black Elk lived, Black Elk was standing outside, and it seemed like he was standing out there waiting for them, although he would have no way of knowing they were coming. But it was in the middle of the day, not a time he would be standing out there in the sun, but seemed like he was waiting for them. And so they made their introductions, and John said to him, I've interviewed many of the Sioux and the Omaha, and I know some of the history of your people, and I would like to talk to you about the old times, if you're interested in talking about it. And so Black Elk just sat there for like a long time. And he said he was he was like squinting and looking down at the earth. And it just went on forever. And so John said, I was about to break the silence when Black Elk looked up at Flying Hawk, the interpreter, because Black Elk did not speak English. And he said, as I sit here, I can feel in this man beside me a strong desire to know the things of the other world. He has been sent here to learn what I know, and I will teach him. So they had more discussion. Black Elk shared some of his mystical experiences with John at that time, but just enough really to whet John's appetite. And then they agreed that John would come back the following spring, in the spring of, I think it was May 1931. And Black Elk shared with him the story of his life. And then in 1932, the book Black Elk Speaks was published. Not very popular at the time, but became more popular as the years went by. So I just wanted to share a little bit about Black Elk's story and the things that Black Elk was most interested in talking about. And he said that when he was about 4 years old, and at this time there had been white people in their country, but there were no white people that he had ever seen. And the buffalo were still running free. There were no roads. There was no railroad that was dividing the land in their part of the country yet. There were no fences. It was just what you imagine when you think about the American West and the natural lifestyle that these people had. He said when he was about 4 years old, if he was out by himself, he started hearing voices. And he thought maybe it was his mother calling him, and he would look around and there would be nobody there. And when he was 5 years old, his grandfather gave him a bow and an arrow. Now, he also said, we grew up a lot faster back then than the children do now. And then he said something kind of derogatory about the children at that time. What he would think about us, I can't even imagine. But because the children of his time, this was, it was a long time ago, 80 years or more. So he jumped on a horse, he's 5 years old, he jumps on a horse with his new bow and arrow, and he heads into the woods along a creek, and he sees a little kingbird sitting in a bush. And he's going to shoot it, because that's what you do when you're a 5-year-old boy and you have a bow and arrow. And before he shot it, the bird started talking to him. And he said, I was not having a vision. This bird talked to me. This was not a dream. This bird really talked to me. He wanted to be very clear about that, because there were lots of mystical, visionary things that happened too, but the animals, in other instances too, would communicate with him. And the bird said, The clouds all over are one-sided. Listen, a voice is calling you. And he looked up, and there was a thunderstorm in the west. And out of the thunderstorm, out of those clouds, there were two men, he said, slanting down like arrows, coming right at him. And they were singing a sacred song. And the thunder coming out of the clouds was like a drum. And they were singing this song, very powerful, 9 years old. No, wait a minute now. No, 5 years old, 5 years old, 5 years old, sorry. So they came down, got really close to him, and then they veered back to the west. And as they veered away, they turned into geese. And he said they flew away. And then he said, nothing much happened that was noteworthy between then, when he was 5 years old, and when he was 9 years old. So he was living his life, he was growing up. He said he would sometimes maybe hear something, but he didn't have any really strong experiences. So when he was 9 years old, one day he was sitting in a teepee, and he got up to leave, and his legs were really sore, and he couldn't figure out what was going on. And then the next day, their village was moving, and he was on his horse with all his friends. They were all on horseback, and he got off of his horse and he fell to the ground and he couldn't stand back up. So his friends got him back on the horse, took him back to his teepee, and he got really sick. And he was laying in his teepee. He couldn't sit up, but he was laying in his teepee with his mom and dad, and he looked out the window. He looked out the entrance where the flap goes. And he said he saw those same two men coming down out of the clouds, just like he had seen 4 years earlier. And they came all the way down to the ground. And then he stood up. And he said, I was so light and my legs didn't hurt, but I got up and I went out of the teepee. And he said that these two men said to him, hurry, come, your grandfathers are calling you. And he said a little cloud came down out of the sky, right down to where he was, and he somehow was on it, and then he was flying away towards these men into the clouds. And he could look back, and he saw his mom and his dad in the teepee, and he felt sad to be leaving them. So he was obviously, at this point, he was in the spirit. And he was sick, really sick, and everybody thought he was going to die for 12 days. And his body swelled up, his face swelled up. Nobody could figure out what was wrong with him. But while he was in that state, he had this incredible experience in the spirit, which is, I'm not going to go into. It's in the book. But for him, from that point forward, that's all he really thought about. For the rest of his life, that was the thing that he thought about the most, because it was the thing that was the most real to him. And he always felt like from this vision, he was going to have the power to help his people overcome the hardships that were coming to them. And because that never really happened, things got just worse and worse and worse. Well, he always kind of felt, even as an old man, that in some way he had failed, that he had not been strong enough. He had just been a 9-year-old boy, and he had not been able to fulfill what he was given that vision for. But if you look back, There was no stopping what was coming. I'll just say a couple things about his life that are interesting beyond the part about his visions, and that is that he was second cousins with Crazy Horse. He was only 13 years old. I think it was in 1876 that the Battle of the Little Bighorn happened. So he wasn't out in the battle with the men, but he was there. He was in the village, and then he went to the battlefield afterwards, and he witnessed all kinds of things. And later, he went with the Wild Bill, Wild West show on tour to Europe, where they, in this Wild West show, they staged like battles and everything, and there were real Native Americans there. So he had quite an interesting life in that regard, but he always had a sadness in his heart because he felt like this great vision that he had been given had never really been of that much help. But I was reflecting on that, and I was thinking how, okay, so almost 60 years after that vision, John Neihart shows up and records the whole thing for future generations. And we just don't know how things are going to happen. And then literally in 1972, exactly 100 years after he had this vision, I'm sitting at Sunburst Farm reading about it. And the inspiration it gave me as a young seeker to dive deeper into my practice. So we don't really know what the things that we are given in life are maybe for exactly. But if we continue to put out the best that we can, which he did his whole life, then good things will come. He had for the rest of his life, he did have premonitions. Like he knew when soldiers were approaching, or he knew when enemy native people were approaching to attack them, or he knew where the buffalo were. And he knew, I'm sure, when Flying Hawk and John Neihart were driving up to his house. And John brought two of his daughters there, and I think they set up a teepee for them to stay in while they were there. And one of his daughters was a really good stenographer, and so she took really good notes, and that's what the book was based off of. So I wanted to just read one more time this quote, because I think it's so phenomenal. The first piece, which is the most important, is that which comes within the souls of people when they realize their oneness with the universe. And when they realize at the center of the universe dwells the Great Spirit, and that this center is really everywhere. It is within each one of us. You have to ask yourself the question, right? I have to ask myself the question, how can the center of the universe be everywhere and within us all at the same time? This is, I think this is what non-dual thinking is all about. It doesn't have to be either or. It is this and that. The native people, I think from my perspective, and maybe you would agree with me, they have a special connection to the earth. And Black Elk put it this way. He says, "It is the story of all life that is holy and is good to tell, and of us two-legged sharing in it with the four-leggeds and the wings of the air and all the green things. For these are all children of one mother, and their father is one spirit." And so their path, if you would, their life, the way they lived was so natural and connected to the spirit that is within everything. And we know this in our hearts. We know it in our minds. We long to experience it through the expansion of our souls, to be able truly to experience that oneness that he's talking about here. All the children of one mother, and their father is one spirit. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about another author. No, I take that back, not an author. This guy never wrote anything either, and neither did Black Elk. But another man, and who some of you may be familiar with, and his name is Sri Ramakrishna. And he was a saint, a mystic who lived in the 1800s in India. And his primary disciple became Vivekananda, who coincidentally was born also in 1863, the same year as Black Elk. But Ramakrishna, in his book, The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, in that book, he speaks very simply about real spiritual concepts. People would ask him questions, and he would give them such simple answers. So this idea that we are never alone, and that spirit is always with us, and like Don was saying, each one of us has probably in life experienced the feeling of being alone, of not feeling connected. And there's so many people in the world who feel that way today. But the consciousness of spirit is in everything all of the time. And we have access to it, but it depends on our perspective that we've developed within ourselves to be able to experience it. So I wanted to share this little thing that Ramakrishna wrote, or didn't write, but talked about, and then one of his students recorded it. Here we go. But one must go into solitude to attain this divine love. To get butter from milk, you must let it set into curd in a secluded spot. If it is too much disturbed, milk won't turn into curd. Next, you must put aside all other duties and sit in a quiet spot and churn the curd. Only then do you get butter. Further, by meditating on God in solitude, the mind acquires knowledge, dispassion, and devotion. But the very same mind goes downward if it dwells in the world. The world is water, and the mind milk. If you pour milk into water, they become one. You cannot find the pure milk anymore. But turn the milk into curd and churn it into butter. Then when that butter is placed in water, it will float. So practice spiritual discipline in solitude and obtain the butter of knowledge and love. Even if you keep the butter in the water of the world, the two will not mix. So there's some information from the country of the land of India. We have the spirituality of the native peoples of this country, and every indigenous culture around the world has a connection to spirit. Our culture is finding its way back. But so much of our energy goes into the outer world, and especially in this country, we have become such great consumers of unnecessary things. And we have to really take the opportunity that's been given to us and turn it into an inner search, like Ramakrishna is talking about, and dwell on the little glimpses that maybe we've had of the spirit world in whatever way we have experienced it. Because each one of us, we are having experiences that are prompting us towards that inner search. I believe all of the time, but we don't pay attention some of the time, maybe a lot of the time. But to remember that spirit is alive in the birds, in all of the four-legged creatures, in the grasses of the earth, and alive within ourselves as we sit and churn the life force into something that we can float on while we're in this earth, on this earth. Something that will keep us above the fray, and that we can do the work that we came here to do and not be constantly pulled into the five senses and into the experiences of this world that we're in. Because we're here as agents of transformation. There's no doubt in my mind. And we're doing a great work. As are, I'm going to say thousands, maybe millions of people across the planet who are also involved in their spiritual practice, whatever it may be. We're going to listen to a clip of Norm, our founder. We're going to let that take us into meditation. I'm not quite ready, Paul, but I'll cue you when we're ready. And Al sent me a number of clips to choose from, and I was reading through them. And I noticed that this one was from New Year's 2005. This may be the last talk that Norm gave to our Sunburst group and to whoever was at that retreat, because I'm sure it was a tree retreat weekend at New Year's. Because shortly after that, sometime between then and his birthday, which was just February 3rd, he started getting ill. And by the end of that year, December 30th, 2006, he took his final breath, and he left his physical body. But thank God he's still around spiritually, because I know that there's people here who see him sometimes, and I know I can feel his presence. And we're forever grateful to our brother Norm. But I wanted to mention, just on the theme of this, the Native Americans, that throughout the years at Sunburst, we had a number of dealings, associations, friendships with different people from different Indian tribes. And the first one I remember is White Bear from the Hopi who came. And you can see some of his artwork in our lodge. There was a guy who came and spent some time here. His name was Archie Fire Lame Deer. And he was a Lakota Sioux. And he was also a holy man. And then Grandfather Semu, a Shumash elder. And at that time, he was the leader of a local group of young Native American people called Red Wind. And Red Wind and Sunburst we developed a friendship, and the Red Wind men would come and the women would come, and we would have a drumming. And they would sit and drum for us. And we would all celebrate together and eat together, and it was wonderful. And then for Norm's celebration of life, memorial service, we had the lodge, but we didn't have the temple at that point. And we set up a big tent out in the field, kind of where the pond is, or in that direction from the front of the lodge. And we had a really beautiful service, and many, many people, people who had been members of Sunburst way back in the day, and lots of people came because Norm was so beloved. And one of the things that we did there that happened was that Tatacho, one of our very dear friends, who's also a Shumash, an elder, he did a drumming, a special ceremonial drumming for Norm's service that was really powerful. I know anybody who was there can remember it. So anyway, let's listen to Norm take us into silent meditation where we can churn the curd into butter and float on the higher consciousness of God.
Oh, as I look around today at all the beautiful faces here in this room, intent upon you standing here in our midst, Lord, in the center of the circle, you breathing your breath of life into our souls, through the crowns of our heads. Let the dove of your mercy and love descend. Even as Christ your Son received, let us all receive the dove of your love and life, your breath of life, breathed into us through the crowns of our heads, into our hearts and minds, your beloved presence. We all know you are here. We seek you. We desire to feel you. You even now, beating in our hearts, breathing in our lungs. You gave us this life. You can take it away. We know this. We desire to see our immortal souls, our immortality in you.
wanted to share just a few more thoughts before the end of service. I was reflecting that when Black Elk was interviewed in 1931, 1931, it was only 55 years after many of the things that he was talking about. And Black Elk lived to 1950. And I know for myself, I think about that time period as being so long ago, but it wasn't that long ago. It would be as if today somebody came to talk to some of the old gray hairs in Sunburst to learn about the early days of Sunburst. That's roughly the same time period. It wasn't that long ago. Well, I guess maybe it was that long ago. But I just find that interesting. And like Black Elk, I know for me, the things that stand out are not so much about the lifestyle, but more about the spiritual content that Norm brought to us. He sat every Sunday for many years and just gave these long talks that we were able to absorb. And that's why we're still here. Not because we had a groovy lifestyle, because the lifestyle has changed. But the compass needle is always headed towards the spiritual sun, our true North Pole. I'd like to end with something from Yogananda that fits into We Are Not Alone. Just gotta find it. This is from Yogananda's book, The Divine Romance, and it's the last paragraph. Last night as I meditated, heaven opened up to me. Everything I see in God, light comes true. When you know God was just hiding from you, the greatest romance you can have is the romance with God. Human love goes away in a little while, but your romance with God is eternal. Not one day must pass without seeing God. That is why I wrote, through endless incarnations I called out thy name, searching by streamlets of all my silvery dreams. It was always God the Father behind all the fathers, the mother behind all the mothers, the lover behind all the lovers that I sought through incarnations. God is the lover, and our souls are the beloved. And when the soul meets the greatest lover of the universe, then the eternal romance begins. The love that you have been seeking for incarnations through all human loves is at last yours. You will never want anything else. And you will never be alone. All right. Thank you, everyone. We're going to have some songs. End our service here. And the first one
We